established under the Y Accords. He was a research director of the Center for Monitoring the Impact of Peace, writing reports to the Palestinian Authority, Syrian and Jordanian school books. He's the author of Palestinian Media Watch's many reports and studies on aspects of Palestinian society's issues of incitement, and he's also reporting on how foreign aid is misused by the Palestinian Authority for the promotion of terror and obstacles to the peace process. So it's an honor to welcome you here this afternoon.
Thank you. And also thank you very much for giving me the honor of having the opportunity to address this important group. Palestinian Media Watch was founded 14 years ago. And the goal was to find out what Palestinians were saying amongst themselves in Arabic. We knew what they were saying in English, we knew what they were saying to the media. We wanted to know what they were saying in Arabic, and particular focus, what were they saying to their children. Because we believed that what Palestinians were saying to their children in the formal education, in the school books, in the informal education, in the media, was going to determine if we had peace in the next generation. It also was a true indicator of what the Palestinians really believed. Now, to do this, when we read the newspapers, when we follow television, when we read the school books, we study everything. In Palestinian society, we study even the sports pages, culture, even crossword puzzles, to get a total sense of what's happening at the people level in Palestinian society. Now, just give you one example. What could possibly be important in the sports section that we would study sports on? I'll show you 3 examples among hundreds that we found in the sports pages. We found soccer tournaments named after people like Abdul Basim, who was a suicide terrorist from the Passover Seder. We found summer camps named after Wafa Idris, who was the first woman suicide terrorist. And just this month, there was a summer camp named after Dalal Mughrabi, who was the woman terrorist who hijacked the bus in 1978. It was the worst terrorist attack in Israel's history, 37 were killed. All of this and many, many hundreds of more examples from sports. So we see how sports is being used in Palestinian society to create role models and to create heroes for Palestinian children. Today's topic is Palestinian anti-Semitism. And the question is, to what extent is anti-Semitism basic to Palestinian society? And the question is, what I want to show is not only is it basic, but it actually is an inherent part of the evolving Palestinian national ideology. Now, the Palestinian Authority had a great challenge. In 1994, when the Palestinian Authority was established, the great challenge was to create a Palestinian national identity. Most Palestinians had an identity that was based on family, based on clan. There was not a Palestinian national identity by any means. They had a challenge of creating this. In addition, there was Israel, who had a 3,000-year documented history. They didn't have any history that was documented, any history at all. So the question is, how do you create this Palestinian national identity? Now, one of the things that we have found since the very beginning is that it was critical for the Palestinians to create a history, a thousands-of-year-old history for themselves, and at the same time to deny Israel this thousands-of-year-old history. The result of this ideology, and I'll show you this all in their own words as we go along, the result is Palestinians then would have a right to exist and Israel would not have a right to exist. Now, the question was, what do you do with 3,000 years of Jewish history? And the second question was, this is a great challenge, this is where the anti-Semitism comes in and glues it all together. How do you explain the Jewish presence in the land if you didn't have history before, as the Palestinians are claiming? So this is the setup, and this is what the Palestinians were challenged. I'll show you how this plays out. Now, before we discuss, there are 2 separate messages in Palestinian society that alternate. One is that Israel doesn't exist, and one is that Israel doesn't have a right to exist. Today we're going to be talking about Israel doesn't have a right to exist. I want to show you how they also do the other. Israel not existing at all, and this is something that's a very, very important and frequent educational message for children. This is an example from a Palestinian children's program last year.
أهم بناء فلسطين وين موقعه؟ بحيفا ولا بعكا؟
ولا فكري؟
يافا نشوف الإجابة على الكمبيوتر إذا صحيح. برافو!
Literally, the world is no Israel. All the parts, of course, are parts of Israel. Look at Palestine. We also have examples like this in the school books. There is no Israel. Everything is Palestine. And from a quiz on Palestinian television between universities just a few weeks ago, the Palestinian coast and this quiz show between universities was 235 kilometers long, which is the length of Gaza and all of Israel. The area of Palestine is 27,000 square kilometers. A world literally in which Israel doesn't exist. This is one stage. But what we're going to be focusing on today is denying Israel's right to exist. Erasing history. Israel, even when they say that Israel exists, Israel doesn't have a right to exist. And I'll show you how this is done. First of all, the erasing of Jewish history. This is a PA historian last year on TV.
أن هناك رؤية لأن يكون مكانها قدس الأقداس في الهيكل المزعوم وأسطورة رواية ليس لها قيمة مثل ألف ليلة وليلة إلا في فلسطين 60 عاما من العفريات وخاب ظنهم فلم يجدوا شيئا لا إبريقا لا عملة لا فخارية لا برونزية لا قطع معدنية لا شيء على الإطلاق من هذه الأسطورة لأنها أسطورة وكاذبة.
It's nothing but a myth, but a lie. There was no, they never found things. This is the message. And I want to show you how common and incessant this message. I'm going to show you 5 examples, all from within a 2-week period last month. This was in the unofficial Palestinian television. They talked about the false temple, claiming that Al-Aqsa Mosque was built upon its ruins. And this, throughout history, has been a false and fictitious matter. The Jews claim this was built over the alleged temple. Jerusalem will continue to rebel against erasing its identity and the Judaization. Jerusalem is completely an Islamic city. All of this within a few days. Different things on Palestinian media. Here, this was an event, and this is very significant. The Al-Quds Open University in the Ramallah district yesterday celebrated the publication of the encyclopedic volume of the university journal which deals with Jerusalem. So we're talking here about academia. They're dealing with Jerusalem. And the Minister of Culture who was there said that the Ministry of Culture and the universities are partnering and collating, studying, and inscribing the true version of the history of Jerusalem. A religious leader said Jerusalem will remain Arabic and Islamic, and the president of the university, the Jews' connection to Jerusalem is no more than a military occupation. Israel never had a history. The Jews never had a history. Like I say, these are 5 examples, all from last month, and there are many, many more. This is an incessant message that Jews don't have a history in the land. On the other hand, who does have a history? This is a Palestinian historian last year.
ليش الاحتلال بيهتم بسرقة وانتحال وتشويه وتضييع التراث الفلسطيني؟ لسبب انه هو يفتقد الى تاريخ والتراث تاريخ بدل على ارتباطنا بالارض له عمق تاريخي 4-5-6,000 سنة.
Palestinian history is 4,000 years, and just last month we had Sheikh Sabri, who's a senior religious figure. He said the Palestinians have history there 7,500 years ago. We get many, many different numbers. So this is the message that continues, and it's in the school books. Thousands of years of Palestinian history, and all of Jewish history is fake and is a lie. So this is the first stage. Now, some very interesting things happened because of this, and I'll just give you one example. If there was no Jewish history, but there was a Palestinian history, then Jesus must be a Palestinian. And here is the Mufti speaking last year.
نتحدث عن سلسلة ممتدة من سيدنا آدم عليه السلام إلى سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. هذه السلسلة الممتدة تمثل دعوة التوحيد، تمثل رسالة الإسلام. الأنبياء كلهم أبناء دين واحد، وسيدنا عيسى عليه السلام ولد في هذه الأرض وعاش في هذه الأرض، معروف ولد في بيت لحم وهكذا، فهو فلسطيني بامتياز.
Okay, so he's a Palestinian par excellence, of course no basis in reality, but it completes the picture. It's necessary because of the fact that they denied Israel's existence or the Jewish existence in the land. So this is the first stage. Now, giving you 5 examples, I could spend hours just on this. This is a constant message. Now, because of this, Israel is said to have no historical right to exist, and because of that, Israel doesn't have the right to exist today. Because of this, what leads from this is the conclusion is that Palestine was stolen. The word stolen appears, I would say, dozens of times a month in many different connections. I want to show you one example from a Palestinian school book. This is one of the newest books, came out a few years ago for grade 12, still in use today. This is how the creation of Israel is taught to Palestinian children. Palestine's war ended with a catastrophe that is unprecedented in history when the Zionist gangs stole Palestine and established state of Israel. Israel is a theft. Because they don't have a right to exist, it's a theft. I'll just give you a more current example. June of this year, those who stole Palestine in search for an alleged homeland that would take them in in a whole article, but that's the attitude. Israel stole Palestine. It belongs to that. Now, because of this, the terminology of describing Israel in the newspaper articles, many different euphemisms. So, for example, in this one article, they talked about there were demonstrations held yesterday. These demonstrations were in Israel. So demonstrations were held yesterday in several Palestinian towns in the interior, occupied in 1948. This is the newspaper, by the way, owned by the Palestinian Authority. They don't want to use the word Israel in this article. It talks about towns in the interior occupied in 48. Also the 48 territories. 48 territories don't want to use and recognize Israel, certainly not in the context, in this case, of Israeli Arabs. Even in crossword puzzles that appear in the official papers, we get examples like this. Clue, a modern city in occupied Palestine, and the solution is totally. So the messages are coming from the leadership, from the people, from the religious leaders, and even appearing in things like crossword puzzles. I want to show you how this identical message comes across to Palestinian children. We know the term 48 Palestinians refers to Israeli Arabs. And this was on a children's program. They were discussing that Israeli Arab children were calling into the program. If they don't refer to them as Israeli Arabs, this is how it's said.
يعني بعرفوا على طول أصدقائنا من مناطق 48 الأراضي المحتلة بيراسلونا وحابين إنه نكون موجودين معهم هناك وفي من اللد وفي كمان أحمد من الناصرة وفي عدنان من بئر السبع أصدقاء الأطفال أكيد رح نبقى دائما متواصلين معكم وإلكم الحق أكيد البرنامج إلكم مثل ما هو لكل طفل فلسطيني لأنه أنتم جزء من فلسطين المحتلة.
Palestine, a very powerful message, not only undermining the way Palestinian Arab children see Israel, but even turning to Israeli Arab children, you should see yourselves as part of living in occupied Palestine. Now, this is then the basic ideology, and now we come to the great challenge of the Palestinian side. Israel doesn't have a right to exist, the Jews are never there, it's all occupied. Now, they have one thing that they must explain to their people. Why did the Jews come and leave Europe, leave the comfortable places that they had in Europe, and come to Palestine and steal it if they had no connection? And here is where you see this very active and short moment. Antisemitism is the glue that holds this entire ideology together and the backbone for it. What they do is they redefine Zionism. It wasn't an authentic Jewish movement, but rather it was the following. It was a European movement. We have dozens of examples of this since the beginning of the PA. It was a European movement with two purposes. One, it was a European self-defense to get rid of the Jews and solve the Jewish problem. The Jews are portrayed as this evil force throughout history. The Europeans all suffered for them. And in order to solve their Jewish problem, they decided to steal Palestine and send the Jews in. And the second thing was, why did they send them there and not to any other country? Because the Middle East had oil, the Middle East had natural resources. The Europeans said, let's get rid of the Jews, send them to Palestine. We'll solve two problems. One, we'll be able to control the natural resources, and two, we'll solve the Jewish problem. Now, I want to show this to you in their words, which are very, very powerful. Also, this is very important. This is already from 1998, from the very early days of the Palestinian Authority. This is Al-Jadida, the paper owned by the PA, and this was the article. The difference between Hitler and Balfour was simple. The former Hitler did not have colonies to send the Jews, so he destroyed them, whereas Balfour turned Palestine into his colony and sent the Jews. Balfour is Hitler with colonies, while Hitler is Balfour without colonies. They both wanted to get rid of the Jews. Zionism was crucial to the defense of the West by ridding Europe of the burden of her Jews. Ridding Europe. This was a self-defense action to get rid of the Jews. It wasn't a Jewish idea. This was a European idea. Now, throughout history, then, they rewrite all of Jewish history. This is very interesting. We heard Ruth talk about this earlier. Today, she mentioned Jews are being blamed for the attacks on Jews. Israel is being blamed when it's a victim. Here we see the exact same thing by the Palestinians saying this about Jewish history. Jews suffered throughout history is proof how terrible and evil the Jews were. The Jews weren't victims. Why would everybody have hated the Jews? And I'll just show you one example of this. This is a Palestinian psychologist talking on television explaining Jewish suffering throughout history.
الإسرائيليين سببوا لأنفسهم والنمور بأكد سببوا لأنفسهم في جميع المجتمعات اللي عاشوا فيها المآسي والمجازر والمذابح. الزاوية الأولى كانوا يجمعوا الأموال بأيديهم ويحرموا الآخرين. الزاوية الثانية أن يتجسسوا على الشعوب التي يقوم فيها الناحية الثالثة والمهم الأساسي أن يستعلوا. هذه الأنمطة الثلاثة خلت في حقد، فخلوا الناس في العملية هذا المجتمعات اللي كانت فيها أسباب تنتقم منهم أو تحاول عقابهم.
Jews were responsible, and therefore the more Jews were oppressed and the more persecution that Jews suffered is greater proof of how terrible the Jews were. Everybody can be wrong. It must have been the Jews. That's the message that keeps appearing. Now we see this message of the Jews being a threat to the world in the Palestinian Daily regularly. Here's one example. They actually ran this cartoon twice, in 2005 and in 2009. The Jews somehow threatening the world here. We heard this message also on the political level. This is Abbas Zaki, PLO's ambassador in Lebanon, 2 years ago, talked about these two sides of the coin.
أولاً علينا أن نعرف لماذا قامت إسرائيل. أرادوا أن يتخلصوا من اليهود وفي نفس الوقت المنطقة العربية اكتشفت فيها الطاقة أي النفط، وبالتالي تخلصوا من مشكلة إنهم بيصدوا إسرائيل وبيهيمنوا على ثروات المنطقة، وبالتالي ليست دولة إسرائيل هي لليهود، بل هي مشروع دائما محطة متقدمة للإمبريالية.
It's an outpost of imperialism. It's not a Jewish movement. It's not inherently a Jewish thing. A very, very important part. Now this message comes through regularly. This is July 28th. 2 weeks ago, it was a whole program demonizing the creation of Israel. And here, these are the pictures that appeared while they had the following narration talking about the European colonialists, especially Britain, found that their interests fit the aspirations of the Zionists, etc., and they would allow the racist movement to realize the primary goal. But look at these images that they put on TV. You see here the person wearing a Jewish prayer shawl, holding a rifle, and you see skulls, and here you see a soldier, he's praying or lifting his eyes to heaven, and here you see more skulls. These were the pictures, and by the way, this is Palestinian TV. I'm showing you everything from Palestinian TV here is owned by the Palestinian Authority. It's run from the office of Mahmoud Abbas. I'm not showing you any Hamas. Everything you're seeing here today is from the Fatah leadership, the moderates, who are in negotiations with today. So that's what's critical. This is not coming from the Hamas. This is coming, like I said, this is all very current material. Now, I want to show you how the children have incorporated this message that Israel is a result of the Europeans dumping the Jews on them. This is an interview. We hear this regularly. This is one example expressed very, very strongly.
بالنسبة لقضية وجود اليهود، صدقني أن وجود اليهود على أرض فلسطين لم يكن سوى خلاص جميع دول العالم من أصل الشر، فنجد أن الشر المتمثل في اليهود أصبح لدينا هو الجرثومة، وهو السرطان الذي يكبر وما زال يكبر، ونحن الذين نتأذى من هذا السرطان.
And exactly adopting the messages that we've been seeing coming from leadership. Children are expressing this, and that was a little while ago. But now, just literally a couple of weeks ago, we're hearing an interview with a refugee. She called herself a refugee living in Jerusalem, and this is what she said.
يعني ما حدا سائل فينا والناس الأوروبيين كمان هم يبعدوا عنا يعني هم زي قولين فلو أطلعوا جبنون علينا هذا شيء ما بسيط هذا شيء ما بسيط.
These statements that we see children, adults, old people making statements that we see how successfully the Palestinian Authority has incorporated this and other ideologies to their people. Because when you hear children expressing they didn't wake up one day and think of this on their own, these are messages that they're learning in school. These are messages that are coming through, and here we're seeing literally at all ages this message. The Europeans had to give it to the Jews. That's why the Jews came to Israel. Now, all of this then establishes the Palestinians very powerfully as victims, and that becomes really the dominant part of their national identity. That's why they're always talking about the Nakba. They talk about Nakba denial when people don't recognize it the way they identify. Because that means that just by being born with the state of Israel existing, they are victims, and then victimhood. And Israel's having done what they did to them becomes a very, very important part of who they are. Who they are, we're the victims of what the Europeans did in order to get rid of the Jews. But what I've showed you up till now is the demonization of the past. What I want to show you is it's not just victimhood in the past. The Palestinians present themselves as ongoing daily victims of this evil of the Jews, and it's important for two reasons. One, they're still victims, but two, the more they demonize Jews today and Israel today, the more they prove that they're correct in saying that Israel was created because the Europeans wanted to get rid of the Jews. I'll just show you a few examples of the kind of demonization that's going on right now. Most of these things are in the last short while, the last few months. This is from Palestinian television. They ran this with these poisonous snakes attacking anyone who wants to get up the ladder of peace. This demonized Jew over here in the Palestinian newspaper. Here on Palestinian television, taken from a Qatari paper a few months ago, this demonized Israeli over here is sucking on the world with the support of the United States. All of this from Palestinian. Now this is just a few weeks ago. This is a fascinating one. The text here below in the Arabic is, keep your flag clean. And how do you keep your flag clean? You dump out. And again, this is on Palestinian television. It was showing a picture that appeared in a school and the posters that the children had made in the schools. Now here's the Mufti of Palestine. Just 2 months ago on TV, the Jews are the enemies of Allah. So here we bring in a whole different area that we haven't touched on now. The Jews are being demonized. Why? Because God hates the Jews. The Jews are the enemies of Allah. This is even more significant as far as I'm concerned than the Mufti. This is an insignificant person. She's a moderator doing interviews with children of prisoners of Israeli security prisoners, all being terrorists or in Israeli prisons. She's interviewing the children, and this is what she says to them.
بن شادي يا محمد عامر لأنه شادي وصى إنه بده يشوف ابنه. وين بابا شادي؟
في السجن.
مين سجنه؟ مين اللي سجنه؟
اليهود.
اليهود هذول أعدائنا صح؟
The Jews are enemies, right? So the Mufti is saying with the enemy of God. This moderated very spontaneously. Official Palestinian television. The Jews are enemies, right? I'm going to show you a whole series of very current libels that are appearing in the Palestinian Authority over the last few months, and some of them for a few years already. Israel steals Palestinian organs. Israel is doing Holocaust to the Palestinians. Israel is spreading AIDS and drugs, destroying the Al-Aqsa Mosque, doing Nazi-like experiments, and converting Arafat. And I'll just show you some of this. This is the Minister of Prisoner Affairs. Israel is stealing body parts. This was in June of this year. The meeting dealt with the subject of the martyrs' bodies and the theft of their organs. Here's the Kaiser Tamimi, at the time he was Chief Religious Justice. Israel is spreading AIDS. Said it's twice on TV, and then 2 months ago there was a whole symposium, an event sponsored by the United Nations. They talked about fighting HIV and drugs, which is being spread intentionally by Israel. So they're claiming Israel spreading drugs and cancer amongst Palestinians. Israel is trying to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is an image in the Palestinian paper. Now this is a very important one. Israel is duplicating the Holocaust. The Holocaust being the ultimate victimization that could possibly be. Israel is duplicating the Holocaust. This is from the official paper earlier this year. Everything the Zionist movement complained about over the course of its long history against Nazism, fascism, and against anti-Semitism is being done now by Israel in exactly the same way with great fervor. Against the Palestinian people, they say here, the Holocaust, they're doing the Holocaust every day, every hour, and every minute. Now, from this general accusation, I want to show you they actually go down to the details of the Holocaust. And here, for example, this is a research paper done by a member of parliament from the Fatah. And look at what he writes in his research that he just published 2 years ago about Israel's war of independence in 1948. He said this is material that just came to light now, and listen to what he writes. Palestinian prisoners were used for forced labor by the Israeli military. Zionist militias used every means of extermination and burning people alive. Zionist militias set up internment camps for civilian populations like the camps set up by Nazi Germany to separate them into 3 groups according to whether they were intended for deportation, execution, or detainment, selection. That's what he's describing. The doctors in these prison clinics are using the prisoners as guinea pigs for clinical testing of drugs, medical present. All of these are examples from the Holocaust. And also, there was no policy of detaining people during the war of 1948. There is much evidence that confirmed the fact that civilians were executed in mass after they were detained. All of this in research by a Fatah member of parliament and released in the Palestinian papers, literally Holocaust impersonating. I'll show you one video which you will absolutely recognize this description from stories we know from the Holocaust, but this is what they're accusing Israel.
جمعوا الذكور في صفوف انساق، كل انساق 7 8 اشخاص، وأجبرهم على حفر خندق عميق في المقبرة، وأول نسخ وضع إلى جانب الخندق، أطلق عليه النار بالرشاشات، قتلوا. طلبوا من النسخ الثاني أن يدفنهم أو يدخلهم بالحفرة، وهكذا نسخا بعد نسخ.
Again, literally taking the stories of the Holocaust and turning it on themselves, and well, most of this stuff is very, very current, literally happening today. Also, in terms of Holocaust impersonating, during the Gaza war, there was this demonstration in Ramallah, and they dressed themselves up as prisoners in concentration camps. They also had this in Gaza a year before, where they made this mock oven, and children were putting dolls inside the oven. Here's a swastika and a literally everything Israel is being accused of, everything. Now, what is their solution? If Israel has no right to exist, Israel is a scheme of force. The Europeans got rid of them, they dumped them on us, and now we're suffering just like the Europeans suffered. What's the solution? I want to show you. They say this regularly. And this is official Palestinian television, May of this year. They had this little item. It's a little clip that they prepared especially for the anniversary of the creation of Israel, which they call the Nakba, the catastrophe. And they ran this every day for about, I guess, about 10 days. And listen to what should happen to Israel because they're stolen.
أنا من يافا، أنا من حيفا، أنا من عكا، أنا من الناصرة، أنا من جنزو، أنا من زكريا، أنا من عين كارم. أنت من وين؟ أنت من وين؟ Where are you from? طبعا أنت من أوكرانيا، طبعا أنت من ألمانيا، من بولندا، من روسيا، من إثيوبيا، فلاشة. لماذا سلبت وطني وأخذت مكاني؟ من فضلك ارجع على وطنك الأول عشان أرجع أنا على وطني الأول. هذا وطني، ارجع إلى وطني.
Okay, and here we see it ties it all together. Because you stole, that's what they use the word, you saw it right in the beginning. Because you had no right, then everything is stolen, you came from Europe. Therefore, why don't you go back and that will bring peace? And like I said, this is official Palestinian television numerous times, and this was already when the proximity talks were going on. The final thing I just want to show you is one final libel, because it's a very significant one. It's the libel that Israel killed Yasser Arafat. This libel first appeared right after he died. In fact, it already appeared while he was sick, that we had done something to make him sick. We've heard dozens of detailed conspiracy explanations of how he poisoned him. And they say now that he was killed by poison. We've heard it from many, many top people. I want to show you two examples of this, both connected to children because they're very important. One is June 4th of this year. This was a PLO cultural festival in the presence of the Ministry of Culture, and this was one of the items that they had.
يابا يابا يا ختيار ليش هيك صار؟ ليش هيك صار؟ اختارك الموت وما كفيت المشوار. ما تسألوا ليش هيك صار؟ ما تسألوا ليش هيك صار؟ امبارح صلبوا عيسى المسيح واليوم سمموا الوالد وختيار.
Yesterday they crucified Jesus, today they killed him. Putting him, again, the parallel here is very, very significant, and something else that's very significant. Why did they pick something that we've thought about for a while? Why did they say that he died from poison? And the answer, I believe, is because of the Islamic tradition that Muhammad died from poisoning by the Jews. By saying that Arafat died by poisoning, the Jews are actually raising him up to a very, very high level. He was killed the same way by some slow poison that took a long time, and eventually he died the same way as Muhammad. So this is the message coming through. And the final item I want to show you is the result of all of this education, the result of this demonization. This was on a special program in November last year. This was the 5th anniversary of Yasser Arafat's death. And at this event, they interviewed, for this event, they had a major Fatah event where all the leaders of the Fatah were there, and then they showed a film of children who they'd interviewed. And look at the children, look at what they chose to show at this event.
إلى ياسر عرفات تحية طيبة وبعد رسائل من أطفال فلسطين.
وسمموا اليهود وأنا بكرههم كثير والله يجزيهم. مات هو مسموم من اليهود. طبعا مش عارف من إيش مات بس أظل بعرف من يهود.
I don't know what he died from, but I know it was the Jews. And I think this statement encapsulates all of the problems we're seeing in Palestinian education and the intense the intense anti-Semitism, and worse, the great success of anti-Semitism. He doesn't know how he died, but it must have been the Jews, and that's what the problem has been throughout history. If something bad happens, people say, oh, it must have been the Jews, people are dying in a plague, people, whatever it is, it must have been the Jews. All of this demonization, that the Jews are spreading AIDS, the Jews are poisoning them with drugs. If Arafat died, it must have been the Jews. Very powerful on a couple levels. One, that the child said it, but two, that the Palestinian leadership chose to make this presentation and include this, this video in this final event. And the final thing I'll say, this is a universal challenge. We heard today how the world, the demonization of Israel in the world today, and the attacks on Israel in the world today, in part is said because Israel is responsible for all of the attacks on it. We heard that from Ruth. Israel's responsible. Israel's done so many terrible things. That's why Israel is a victim of terror. Well, that's exactly what we're hearing today from the Palestinians. Israel is doing all these terrible things today, then becomes the basis for not only Palestinian anti-Semitism, but much of the world's anti-Semitism and anti-Israel demonization. All of this has to be dealt with. We have been saying at Palestinian Watch for years that unless there is an educational peace process that parallels the political peace process, there is no possibility for peace. And it is our hope that from places like here, from Yale, that the message will go out to the world that without the cessation of anti-Semitism, without an intense peace education process, there will be no chance for peace, and that's what we need as soon as possible. Thank you.
So it's an honor to welcome you here to the event at YIISA event.
Thank you, Charles. I welcome you to this afternoon's plenary session on Islamism and the construction of Jewish identity. I will introduce our three speakers at the outset, and I ask you to hold your questions until the end. Our first speaker is Daniel Tzadik. He is an assistant professor of Sephardic and Iranian studies at Yeshiva University in New York. A Fulbright scholar, Dr. Tzadik obtained his PhD here at Yale in 2002 from the Department of History. He is taught at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and he's received important fellowships in Israel, Germany, and the United States. His most recent book is Between Foreigners and Shi'is, 19th Century Iran and its Jewish Minority. Our second speaker would be Jacob Lasner, also a Yale PhD. He is the Philip M. and Ethel Klutznick Professor Emeritus of Jewish Civilization at Northwestern University, and his specialty is an Associate Professor at the Department of Middle Eastern History, Senior Fellow at the Center for Iranian Studies, and at the Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies at Tel Aviv University. He received his PhD from Harvard University. He specializes in modern Iranian and Shiite